The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My 28-year-old daughter Sarah, sitting across from me at what I thought was my dining room table, casually announced she'd be moving back into what I believed was my house. The fork in my hand trembled as I watched her animated face describe her plans to convert the upstairs guest room into her home office. My wife Janet nodded approvingly. Cutting into her pot roast like this was the most natural conversation in the world. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. 3 days earlier, I'd discovered this house hadn't been mine for over 2 years. If you've ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet while you're still standing, if you've ever experienced that moment when everything you thought you knew about your life crumbles in an instant, then you need to hear this story. Because what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core, and if you think family betrayal can happen to you, you're about to learn just how wrong you can be. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story has more twists than a mountain road, and trust me, you won't want to miss where this goes. My name is Dale Kowalski, and I'm 72 years old. I've lived through Vietnam, raised 3 children, built a successful plumbing business from nothing, and thought I'd seen every kind of human deception there was. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The house we were sitting in that November evening was a beautiful colonial I bought in 1987 with money I'd saved for 15 years. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every improvement had come from my sweat and sacrifice. The hardwood floors I'd refinished myself during weekends when my back was screaming and my hands were raw. The kitchen cabinets I'd installed while Janet complained about the dust and noise. The basement workshop where I'd spent countless hours fixing neighbors' plumbing for extra cash to pay down that mortgage faster. But as Sarah chatted about her plans, describing how she'd paint the walls and maybe knock out a closet to make more space, I felt like I was watching someone discuss renovating a museum exhibit. Because that's what this house had become to me, a monument to my own stupidity. You see, 3 days before this dinner, I'd gone to the county assessor's office to dispute our property tax assessment. It seemed too high, and at my age, every dollar matters. I'd done this before. It was routine, boring paperwork that usually resulted in a small reduction. I walked in with my folder of documents, confident and prepared. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, pulled up our property record on her computer screen. I watched her face change from professional politeness to confusion, then to something that looked almost like pity. "Mr. Kowalski," she said carefully, "according to our records, you're not listed as the current owner of this property." The words didn't register at first. I actually laughed. "That's ridiculous. I've owned that house for over 30 years. There must be some mistake in your system." She turned the screen toward me, and I saw my name listed as the previous owner. The current owner, as of September 2022, was someone I'd never heard of, a woman named Patricia Chin. The transaction was listed as a warranty deed, with a sale price of $425,000. "This has to be an error," I insisted, my voice getting louder. "I never sold my house. I live there. I've been paying the utilities, the insurance, everything." The clerk's expression grew more sympathetic. "Sir, I understand this is confusing, but our records show this deed was properly filed and notarized. You might want to contact an attorney." I drove home in a daze that day, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was identity theft. Maybe someone had forged documents. Maybe the county had confused our property with another one. But deep in my gut, I knew something was terribly wrong, and it wasn't a simple clerical error. When I got home, Janet was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the same dinner where Sarah would later announce her moving plans. I wanted to tell Janet immediately about what I'd discovered, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she hummed contentedly while stirring the sauce, or maybe it was 37 years of marriage that had taught me to read the subtle signs when something wasn't quite right. Instead, I went to my desk and pulled out our important papers. The original mortgage documents were there, along with the deed from when we bought the house. But as I searched through the files, I noticed something that made my hands shake. Several documents were missing, including the title insurance papers and the most recent property tax statements. I'd always been meticulous about keeping records. In my plumbing business, documentation had saved me from lawsuits more than once. I knew exactly where these papers should be, and they weren't there. That's when the first wave of real fear hit me. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. Someone who had access to our home, someone who knew our filing system, had taken specific documents. I spent that entire evening pretending everything was normal while my mind raced through increasingly dark possibilities. When Janet asked why I was so quiet, I made up some story about a difficult customer. She seemed to accept it, but I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The next morning, I called my attorney, Frank Mazer, a guy I'd known since high school who'd handled the legal work for my business over the years. Frank had always been straight with me, never sugarcoated bad news, which is exactly what I needed. "Dale, this is serious," Frank said after I explained what I'd discovered. "If someone has fraudulently transferred your property, we need to act fast. But I have to ask, are you absolutely certain you didn't sign anything? Sometimes people forget about documents they've signed, especially if it was part of a larger transaction." "Frank, I'm 72, not dead. I know what I've signed and what I haven't. Someone stole my house, and I want to know how." Frank arranged to meet me the next day to review everything. He also suggested I order a copy of the deed from the county to see exactly what had been filed. When that document arrived by fax later that day, I stared at it in complete shock. The signature on the deed looked exactly like mine. The notarization was from a notary I'd never heard of in a part of town I rarely visited. But most disturbing of all, the deed was dated on a day when I clearly remembered being homesick with the flu, September 15th, 2022. Janet had been taking care of me, bringing me soup and medicine. I definitely hadn't left the house to sell it. This is where the story gets complicated, and if you think you know where this is heading, trust me, you don't. Because what I discovered next shattered not just my understanding of my financial situation, but everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I watched my family with new eyes. Janet, my wife of 37 years, chatting about her book club meeting. Sarah, our middle child, excitedly planning her move back home. Our youngest, Michael, texting under the table despite our long-standing rule about phones during dinner. They all seemed so normal, so innocent. But someone in this room, or someone connected to this room, had orchestrated the theft of my life's biggest investment. And as Sarah continued describing her plans to redecorate what she thought was still the family home, I realized I was about to become a detective in my own life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was my daughter, planning to move into a house that legally belonged to a complete stranger, while I sat there knowing I'd been systematically robbed by someone I trusted. The betrayal was so complete, so well executed, that I had to admire its precision even as it destroyed me. But here's what my family didn't know about old Dale Kowalski. I didn't build a successful business by being passive. I didn't survive Vietnam by backing down from a fight. And I certainly wasn't going to let whoever did this to me walk away clean. As Sarah raised her wine glass to toast her homecoming, I raised mine too, smiling like the proud father everyone expected me to be. But inside, I was already planning my investigation, already thinking 3 moves ahead. They'd stolen my house, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left me alive to find out how they did it. And when I found out who was responsible, they were going to learn that revenge, served by a 72-year-old man with nothing left to lose, can be more devastating than they ever imagined. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 40 years of marriage. I lied to Janet about where I was going. I told her I had to meet with a potential customer about a big plumbing job, then drove straight to Frank Mazer's office downtown. The weight of deception sat heavy in my stomach, but I knew I couldn't trust anyone until I understood what had happened. Frank's office hadn't changed much since the 1990s. Same wood paneling, same degrees on the wall, same coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since Carter was president. But Frank himself looked older, grayer, more tired than I remembered. Retirement was calling to both of us, though apparently someone had decided to make mine a lot more complicated. Dale, I've been doing real estate law for 35 years, Frank said, spreading the documents across his desk like he was reading tea leaves. This is one of the most sophisticated frauds I've ever seen. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. He pointed to the forged deed with the tip of his pen. Look at this signature. It's not just close to yours, it's perfect. This wasn't some amateur trying to make a quick buck. This person had time to practice, access to multiple samples of your real signature, and knowledge of the legal process. My chest tightened. What do you mean, access to my signature? Think about it. Where would someone find multiple examples of your signature to practice from? Bank statements, contracts, tax returns, insurance documents. Someone would need regular access to your personal papers over a period of time. The implication hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. Frank was too polite to say it directly, but we both knew what he meant. This was an inside job. There's something else, Frank continued, pulling out another document. I did some digging into this Patricia Chen person listed as the new owner. She exists, has a valid driver's license, pays taxes, the whole 9 yards. But here's the interesting part. She purchased your house for $425,000, which is about $150,000 below market value. So she got a hell of a deal on my house, I said bitterly. Maybe. Or maybe she's not the real buyer. In sophisticated fraud schemes, the actual purchaser often uses a shell company or a straw buyer to hide their identity. Patricia Chen might just be a name on paper. Frank leaned back in his chair and gave me the look I'd seen him give other clients when he was about to deliver bad news. Dale, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is there anyone in your family who might be in financial trouble? Anyone who would know about your assets and have access to your personal documents? The question hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. In 37 years of marriage, Janet had handled most of our paperwork. She paid the bills, filed the taxes, organized our insurance documents. She had access to everything, knew where every important paper was kept, and could forge my signature well enough to fool a bank. She'd been signing my name to deposit slips and routine documents for decades with my permission. But Janet loved that house as much as I did. She'd spent years decorating it, hosting family gatherings there, building memories in every room. The idea that she would sell it behind my back was insane. Unless she had a reason I didn't know about. Frank, I need you to dig deeper into Patricia Chen. Find out who she really is, where she works, how she got the money for this purchase. And I need you to do it quietly. If someone in my family is involved, I don't want them knowing we're investigating. Frank nodded grimly. This kind of investigation takes time and costs money. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes the truth is worse than the mystery. I'm 72 years old, Frank. How many more chances do I get to fight for what's mine? I left Frank's office with more questions than answers and a growing sense of dread. But I also left with a plan. If someone close to me had orchestrated this theft, they would have left traces. People always leave traces. It's just a matter of knowing where to look. My first stop was the bank where we'd kept our accounts for 25 years. I'd always been a hands-on kind of guy with money, checking statements, balancing checkbooks, staying involved. But over the past few years, as my arthritis got worse and Janet took on more of the household management, I'd let her handle more of the day-to-day financial stuff. Marcy Peterson, our usual teller, greeted me with her typical cheerful smile. Hi, Mr. Kowalski. What can I do for you today? I need to review our account activity for the past 2 years. Statements, transactions, everything. Her smile faded slightly. That's quite a lot of information. Is there a specific problem I can help you with? Just being thorough. You know how it is, getting older, wanting to make sure everything's in order. What I found in those statements made my blood run cold. Starting in January 2022, there had been a series of large withdrawals from our savings account, amounts ranging from $5,000 to $15,000, all signed by me, according to the bank's records. By September, when the house was allegedly sold, Nearly $80,000 had been withdrawn from accounts I thought contained over $200,000. The signature on every withdrawal slip looked like mine. The handwriting was identical. But I had no memory of making any of these transactions. I sat in my truck in the bank parking lot, staring at the statements spread across my dashboard, feeling like I was losing my mind. Was it possible I'd forgotten making these withdrawals? Was my memory worse than I thought? But then I noticed something that made everything click into place. Each withdrawal was made on a Tuesday or Thursday, the 2 days of the week when I volunteered at the Veterans Center, a routine I'd followed religiously for the past 5 years. Janet knew my schedule better than anyone. She knew exactly when I'd be out of the house for several hours. The pieces were falling into place, but I still couldn't accept what they were telling me. Janet and I had been together since we were in our 20s. We'd weathered job losses, health scares, the death of her parents, the challenges of raising 3 kids. Why would she steal from me now, when we were supposed to be enjoying our retirement together? I needed more evidence before I confronted her. If I was wrong, accusing her of theft would destroy our marriage. If I was right, our marriage was already destroyed, I just didn't know it yet. That evening, I did something I'd never done in 37 years of marriage. I snooped through Janet's personal belongings. I waited until she was in the shower, then searched through her purse, her dresser drawers, her side of the closet. What I found made me sit down hard on our bed. Hidden in a shoebox behind her winter coats were bank statements for an account I'd never seen before. An account in Janet's name only, with a current balance of over $300,000. The deposit history showed regular transfers from what I recognized as our joint savings account, along with one massive deposit of $425,000 dated September 20, 2022, 5 days after the house was supposedly sold. But it was the letter tucked underneath the bank statements that made me understand the full scope of what had been done to me. The letter was from a divorce attorney, dated just 3 months ago, outlining Janet's options for protecting assets in case of a divorce. The attorney had advised her that since she'd already transferred the marital residence and a substantial portion of the marital assets to her individual control, she would be in a strong position for negotiations. I sat there in our bedroom, holding evidence of the most complete betrayal I'd ever experienced, and finally understood what had happened. Janet hadn't just stolen my house and my savings, she'd been planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. The shower was still running. I had maybe 5 more minutes before she came out. I took photos of every document with my phone, then carefully put everything back exactly where I'd found it. When Janet emerged from the bathroom in her robe, toweling her hair dry, I was sitting on the bed reading a hunting magazine, trying to look like nothing had changed. "You're quiet tonight," she said, settling down at her vanity to apply her nighttime moisturizer. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I said, watching her face in the mirror. "Long day." She nodded and continued her routine, the same routine I'd watched for decades. But now every gesture looked different to me. The way she avoided meeting my eyes in the mirror. The slight tremor in her hands as she applied her cream. The forced casualness of her voice. How long had she been planning this? How many nights had she lain beside me, pretending to be the loving wife while plotting to take everything I'd worked for? As I lay in bed that night, listening to her breathing beside me, I realized that whoever had stolen my house had made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was just another old man who would be too confused, too trusting, or too weak to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, you know the rage I'm talking about. It's not hot anger, it's cold, calculating fury that settles into your bones and changes how you see everything. Hit that like button if you understand that feeling, because tomorrow, I started planning my revenge. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Janet's breathing, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. Every few minutes, my mind would try to find an innocent explanation. Maybe she was protecting our assets from some threat I didn't understand. Maybe the divorce attorney consultation was just research. Maybe there was some logical reason for the secret bank account. But the evidence was too clear, too deliberate. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a calculated plan to strip me of everything I'd worked for. As dawn broke, I made a decision. If Janet wanted to play games, I'd play along. But first, I needed to understand all the players involved. I got up early and made coffee, playing the role of the devoted husband. When Janet came downstairs, I had her favorite mug waiting and asked about her plans for the day. She mentioned running errands and visiting her sister Carol in the afternoon. Perfect. That gave me time to do some investigating of my own. After Janet left, I called Frank Mazer. I need that background check on Patricia Chen fast-tracked. And I need you to run a check on someone else, Carol Brennan. That's Janet's sister. Dale, what's going on? You sound different. I found some things, Frank. Things that change everything. Can you meet me this afternoon? 3 hours later, I was sitting in Frank's office again, but this time I had my own stack of evidence. I showed him the photos of Janet's secret bank account, the divorce attorney letter, the pattern of withdrawals. Frank studied the documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. Dale, I don't know how to tell you this gently, so I'll just say it. Your wife has been systematically looting your marital assets. This isn't impulsive, this is a long-term plan executed over at least 2 years. What about Patricia Chen? Frank pulled out a folder. That's where this gets interesting. Patricia Chen is real, but she's also Janet's cousin's daughter. Lives in California, works as a bookkeeper, clean credit history. But here's the kicker, she took out a mortgage for exactly $425,000 3 days before your house was sold to her. I frowned. So she did pay for the house? She got the money, but not from her own resources. The mortgage was co-signed by someone else. Someone who guaranteed the loan and put up collateral. Frank slid another document across the desk. The co-signer was Carol Brennan. The room seemed to spin. Janet's sister Carol, who'd been coming to family dinners for decades. Carol, who'd been recently widowed and had inherited a substantial life insurance settlement. Carol, who'd always been jealous of our house, our marriage, our seeming stability. So Carol financed Patricia's purchase of my house? It looks that way. But there's more. I did some digging into Carol's financial records. She's been transferring money to Janet's personal account for months. Small amounts, under $10,000 each time to avoid federal reporting requirements. The conspiracy was bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just Janet betraying me, it was a family affair. Janet and Carol had been working together, using Patricia as a front buyer to hide their theft. But I still didn't understand the endgame. If Janet was planning to divorce me, why steal the house? In a divorce, she'd be entitled to half of everything anyway. Frank, pull our divorce records from the state database. I want to know if Janet has already filed papers. 20 minutes later, Frank had his answer. She filed for divorce 6 weeks ago, Dale. But here's the interesting part. She's claiming the marriage has been irretrievably broken for over 2 years, and she's asking for spousal support. She's also claiming that you've been hiding assets and that she had to secure the marital residence to protect it from your alleged financial irresponsibility. The audacity was breathtaking. Janet had stolen my house, drained our bank accounts, and was now claiming in court that I was the one hiding assets. She was positioning herself as the victim of my financial misconduct. Has she served me with papers? Not yet. She's probably waiting for the right moment. Maybe after she has you completely cleaned out. I sat back in my chair, finally understanding the full scope of the plan. Janet and Carol had been systematically transferring our assets to accounts I couldn't access. They'd stolen my house using Patricia as a straw buyer. Janet had consulted with a divorce attorney to ensure she could keep everything she'd stolen. And she was planning to serve me with divorce papers after she'd left me with nothing to fight back with. It was brilliant, really. By the time I discovered the theft, all the assets would be legally in Janet's name, or tied up in accounts I had no access to. I'd be facing divorce proceedings with no money for lawyers, no house to live in, and a legal system that would see me as just another bitter old man making wild accusations against his innocent wife. There was just one problem with their plan: they'd underestimated me. Frank, I need you to do something for me. File an emergency motion to freeze all of Janet's accounts. Use the evidence of fraud to argue that she's dissipating marital assets. Dale, that's going to tip our hand. Once Janet knows we're onto her, she might accelerate her timeline. Good. I want her to panic. People make mistakes when they panic. But I had another reason for wanting to force Janet's hand. I needed to see how deep this conspiracy went. Was it just Janet and Carol, or were there other family members involved? That evening I got my answer. I came home to find Janet on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. She hung up quickly when she saw me, but not before I heard her say, "No, we stick to the plan. He doesn't suspect anything." "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Just Carol. She's having some issues with her insurance company." But 30 minutes later my phone rang. It was my daughter Sarah. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning?" Sarah's voice had an urgency I'd never heard before. "Is everything okay, sweetheart? Just, can we meet? There are some things you need to know." I agreed to meet her at a cafe downtown, and as I hung up, I realized the web was even more tangled than I'd thought. Sarah's call, coming just hours after Janet's mysterious phone conversation, was too much of a coincidence. Either Sarah was part of the conspiracy, or she'd discovered something that made her want to warn me. Tomorrow's meeting would tell me which. That night, as Janet and I went through our normal bedtime routine, I studied her face for any sign of the woman I'd loved for 37 years. But all I saw was a stranger wearing my wife's face, someone who could lie to me for 2 years while systematically destroying the life we built together. "Dale, you've been acting strange lately," Janet said as she climbed into bed. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison for a checkup." The concern in her voice sounded so genuine, so loving. If I didn't know what I knew, I'd have been touched by her apparent worry for my health. "I'm fine, Janet. Just thinking about some business stuff." "Well, don't let it keep you awake. You need your rest." She kissed my cheek and settled into her pillow, the picture of wifely devotion. But I noticed she positioned herself facing away from me, and her breathing never settled into the deep rhythm of actual sleep. She was lying awake too, probably wondering if I'd discovered anything, probably planning her next move in this elaborate chess game she'd been playing with my life. But here's what Janet didn't know: I'd learned a thing or two about strategy during my time in Vietnam. And the first rule of warfare is this: never let your enemy know what you know until you're ready to destroy them completely. Tomorrow, I'd find out if my own daughter was my ally or my enemy. Either way, I was about to start fighting back. And if you think this family drama is complicated now, just wait. Because what Sarah told me the next morning changed everything I thought I knew about this conspiracy. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 9 in the morning, just a few regulars reading newspapers and a barista who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I arrived early and chose a corner table where I could see the entire room, old habits from Vietnam that had served me well in business negotiations over the years. Sarah walked in 10 minutes later, and I immediately knew something was seriously wrong. My daughter, normally put together and confident, looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone to follow her. She ordered a large coffee and sat down across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around the cup. "Dad, what I'm about to tell you is going to hurt. But you need to know before it's too late." My stomach clenched. "Sarah, just tell me straight. Whatever it is, I can handle it." She took a deep breath and looked directly into my eyes. "Mom has been planning to leave you for over 2 years. She's been taking money, moving assets, and she's got Carol and Patricia helping her. But that's not the worst part." "What's the worst part?" "She's been telling people you have dementia." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" For months now, she's been calling family members, friends, even Dr. Morrison. She tells them you're getting confused, forgetting things, that she's worried about your mental state. She's been setting up a narrative that you're not competent to manage your own affairs. I sat back in my chair, the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. Janet's concerned suggestions that I see the doctor. Her increasing tendency to help me with paperwork and financial decisions. The way she'd started speaking for me in social situations, cutting me off when I tried to contribute to conversations. That's why she felt safe stealing everything, I said, more to myself than to Sarah. If anyone questioned the transactions, she could claim I was incompetent, and she was just protecting our assets. Sarah nodded miserably. Dad, there's more. She's been recording conversations with you. Selective editing, taking things out of context to make you sound confused or angry. She showed some of those recordings to the divorce attorney. The coffee in my mouth tasted like ash. My own wife had been building a case against my sanity, documenting my alleged mental decline to justify her theft and abandonment. How do you know all this? Sarah's face crumpled. Because she tried to get me to help her. The confession hung between us like a live wire. My daughter had been approached by her own mother to participate in a conspiracy against me. She told me you were getting worse, that you were starting to make poor financial decisions. She said she needed to protect the family assets before you lost everything. She offered me $50,000 to back up her claims about your mental state. And what did you tell her? I told her she was crazy. Dad, I've been watching you for months, looking for signs of dementia or confusion. You're sharp as a tack. Yeah, you're getting older, but your mind is fine. That's when I realized what she was really doing. Relief flooded through me. At least one person in my family hadn't betrayed me. But the relief was quickly replaced by rage. Rage at what Janet had tried to do to Sarah, trying to turn our daughter against me with bribes and lies. There's something else, Sarah continued. Carol isn't just helping Mom steal from you. She's planning to marry Mom. I stared at my daughter, convinced I'd misheard her. What did you just say? Carol and Mom are in a relationship, Dad. They have been for years. Carol's husband didn't die of a heart attack. He found out about the affair and left her. She lied about him dying to avoid the embarrassment of being dumped by a man who discovered his wife was cheating with her sister-in-law. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. Janet and Carol? My wife and her sister were lovers? For how many years had I been living in complete ignorance while my wife conducted an affair right under my nose? How long have you known? I suspected something last year when I walked in on them at Carol's house. They were sitting too close, touching in a way that seemed intimate. But I convinced myself I was imagining things. Then 3 weeks ago, Carol slipped up and called Mom baby in front of me. When I confronted Mom about it, she broke down and told me everything. Sarah reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Dad, they've been living a double life for at least 5 years. The whole theft scheme isn't just about money, it's about Carol and Mom starting a new life together. They're planning to move to California, buy a house near Patricia, and live as a couple. I sat there processing this information, feeling like everything I believed about my life was dissolving. Not only had my wife stolen my house and savings, not only had she tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, but she'd been cheating on me for years with her own sister. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I almost felt admiration for its scope. Janet and Carol had orchestrated the perfect crime. They'd stolen my assets, destroyed my reputation, and planned to disappear together while leaving me penniless and broken. Sarah, why are you telling me this now? Why not weeks ago when you first found out? My daughter's eyes filled with tears. Because I was scared. Mom made it sound like you really were losing your mind, and I was afraid that confronting her would make things worse for everyone. But then yesterday, she asked me to sign a document. Sarah pulled a folded paper from her purse. She wanted me to sign an affidavit stating that I'd witnessed you acting irrationally and making poor financial decisions. She said it would help her protect the family assets in the divorce proceedings. I unfolded the document and read it. It was a detailed statement claiming that I'd been exhibiting signs of dementia for over a year, that I'd been making bizarre financial decisions, and that Janet had been forced to take control of our assets to prevent me from losing everything to scams or poor investments. If Sarah had signed this, it would have been the final nail in my coffin. Combined with Janet's manufactured evidence and her relationship with the divorce attorney, this affidavit would have made it nearly impossible for me to challenge the theft of my assets. But you didn't sign it. Hell no, I didn't sign it. That's when I realized Mom wasn't trying to protect you, she was trying to destroy you. And I realized I had to warn you before she served you with the divorce papers. When is that supposed to happen? Soon. She was waiting for me to sign the affidavit, but now that I've refused, she'll probably accelerate her timeline. Dad, you need to protect yourself. Get a lawyer, freeze the accounts, do whatever you have to do. I leaned back in my chair, finally understanding the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just theft, it was identity murder. Janet and Carol had systematically worked to erase my legal standing, my financial security, and my reputation. They turned family members against me, built a false narrative about my mental competence, and planned to leave me with nothing. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the bond between me and my daughter. Sarah's refusal to participate in their scheme had given me the information I needed to fight back. Sarah, I need you to do something for me. I need you to keep pretending you're considering Mom's offer. Don't let her know you've warned me. Can you do that? Dad, I don't know if I can keep lying to her. You're not lying to her, you're protecting yourself. If she realizes you're working with me, she might try to involve you in ways that could hurt you legally. Sarah nodded reluctantly. What are you going to do? I'm going to give your mother and Carol exactly what they deserve. As we left the coffee shop, I hugged my daughter tighter than I had in years. In the middle of the worst betrayal of my life, I'd discovered that at least one person in my family still loved me enough to risk everything to protect me. But now I understood the true scope of what I was fighting. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about two women who decided that my life was expendable, that my decades of work and sacrifice meant nothing compared to their desire to be together. They'd calculated that I was too old, too trusting, and too broken to fight back effectively. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were. I drove straight from the coffee shop to Frank Mazur's office, my mind racing with possibilities. The conversation with Sarah had given me crucial intelligence, but it had also revealed how little time I had left. If Janet was planning to accelerate her timeline, I needed to move fast. Frank was in court, but his secretary said he'd be back within the hour. I used that time to make some calls of my own, starting with Dr. Morrison's office. This is Dale Kowalski. I need to schedule a comprehensive cognitive assessment as soon as possible. The receptionist sounded confused. Mr. Kowalski, didn't your wife just call about scheduling that exact test? My blood chilled. When did she call? This morning, actually. She seemed very concerned about your memory. She scheduled you for next Tuesday. Cancel that appointment. I'll call back to reschedule on my own terms. Janet was already setting up the final pieces of her puzzle. She'd arranged for me to be professionally evaluated for dementia, probably hoping to get a diagnosis that would support her claims about my incompetence. If I'd walked into that appointment unprepared, with Janet controlling the narrative about my symptoms, the results could have been devastating. But I had a different idea. When Frank returned, I laid out everything Sarah had told me. His face grew more serious with each revelation. Dale, this is bigger than we thought. If Janet has been systematically building a case for your incompetence, we need to counter that narrative immediately. But we also need to be careful. One wrong move and she'll know we're onto her. What do you recommend? First, we get you that cognitive assessment, but we do it on our terms. I know a neuropsychologist who specializes in cases where mental competence is disputed. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, and yes, that's her real name. She's testified in dozens of cases involving elder fraud and family manipulation. Frank made the call, and Dr. Warren agreed to see me the next day for a comprehensive evaluation. Second, we need to document everything. If Janet has been recording conversations, we need our own evidence. I'm going to give you a recording device. From now on, record every interaction with Janet. Let her think she's controlling the narrative while we build our own case. What about freezing her accounts? Not yet. If we move too early, she'll disappear with whatever money she can grab. We need to catch her in the act of committing fraud, with enough evidence to ensure she can't claim it was all innocent mistake or justified protection of assets. Frank handed me a small digital recorder, no bigger than a thumb drive. This is voice-activated and has a 12-hour battery life. Keep it in your shirt pocket during every conversation with Janet or Carol. I left Frank's office feeling like I was preparing for battle. In a way, I was. Janet and Carol had been waging war against me for 2 years. I just hadn't known I was under attack. That evening, I implemented the first phase of my counterattack. When I got home, Janet was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She looked up with that same false smile I now recognized as part of her performance. "How was your day, honey? You were gone longer than usual." I turned on the recorder in the car, and it was now capturing everything. "Just running errands. Actually, I stopped by Dr. Morrison's office. Made an appointment for a checkup." I watched her face carefully. For just a moment, her smile faltered. "Oh? What kind of checkup?" "Complete physical. Maybe some cognitive testing too. I've been feeling a little scattered lately, and I want to make sure everything's okay upstairs." The relief on Janet's face was unmistakable. She thought I was playing right into her hands, voluntarily seeking the mental health evaluation she needed to support her case. "That's very smart, Dale. I've been worried about you too. You have been forgetting things more often." "Have I? Like what?" "Well, just last week you forgot that we'd already paid the electric bill, and you wrote another check. And remember when you couldn't find your reading glasses for an hour, even though they were on your head?" I listened to her catalog my alleged symptoms, each one carefully chosen to paint a picture of increasing mental decline. The electric bill incident had actually been her mistake. She'd forgotten to tell me she'd already paid it. And the glasses incident had happened once, to everyone over 60 in America. But Janet was weaving these normal senior moments into evidence of dementia, building her case one manufactured symptom at a time. "You know, you're right," I said, playing my part. "Maybe I should have taken care of this sooner. I'd hate for my forgetfulness to cause problems with our finances." "Oh, you don't need to worry about that, honey. I've been handling most of our money matters anyway. That's what wives are for." The irony was perfect. Janet was stealing everything I owned while positioning herself as my protector. Over dinner, I steered the conversation toward our future plans. "Janet, have you ever thought about what we'd do if something happened to me? I mean, if I got sick or, if my mind started to go." She reached across the table and patted my hand with fake tenderness. "Dale, don't talk like that. But if something did happen, I'd take care of everything. That's why it's important that I understand our finances, our assets, all that complicated stuff you've always handled. Speaking of assets, I was thinking we should review our will. Make sure everything's in order." Janet's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Our will? Why now?" "Just being practical. We're getting older, and I want to make sure everything goes smoothly for the kids if something happens to us." "Well, I've actually been thinking about that too. Maybe we should update our financial arrangements, make sure everything's properly organized." I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. She was probably thinking about how to restructure our assets to better support her divorce case. "That's a great idea. Why don't you put together a list of our current accounts and assets? That way we can review everything together." Janet agreed enthusiastically, probably thinking I was making her job easier by asking her to document the very assets she'd been stealing. After dinner, I excused myself to work in my basement shop while Janet watched her evening shows. But instead of working on any projects, I sat in my chair and reviewed everything I'd learned. Janet and Carol had been planning this for years. They'd stolen my house, drained our savings, and were preparing to have me declared incompetent. They'd built an elaborate conspiracy involving family members across multiple states. And they'd done it all while making me believe Janet was the devoted wife who was worried about my declining health. But they'd made several critical mistakes. First, they'd assumed I was too trusting to investigate irregularities. They were wrong. Second, they'd assumed Sarah would go along with their scheme for money. They were wrong about that too. Third, they'd underestimated how much evidence their own elaborate planning would leave behind. Every forged signature, every fraudulent transaction, every conversation with lawyers and co-conspirators had left a trail. And fourth, the biggest mistake of all, they'd left me alive and angry. Tomorrow, I'd begin the final phase of my investigation. Dr. Warren would confirm my mental competence, removing Janet's most powerful weapon. Frank would file the motions to freeze their accounts and recover my stolen assets. And I'd confront Janet with evidence she couldn't explain away. But tonight, I sat in my basement shop, surrounded by the tools I'd used to build a life that two women thought they could steal, and planned exactly how I was going to destroy them both. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought age made you weak, you know the fire I'm talking about. Some people think getting older means getting passive. They're about to learn how wrong they are. Dr. Elizabeth Warren's office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the sterile clinical environment I'd imagined, her waiting room felt more like a comfortable living room, with soft lighting and artwork that seemed designed to put people at ease. But when Dr. Warren herself appeared, I understood why Frank had recommended her. She had the kind of sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Kowalski, I understand you're here because there are questions about your cognitive abilities in the context of some financial irregularities. That's right. My wife has been telling people I have dementia. I need professional documentation that proves I don't. Dr. Warren nodded. Before we begin the formal assessment, I want you to understand what we're doing here. This isn't just about proving you're mentally competent. It's about creating a comprehensive record of your cognitive function that will hold up in court if necessary. The assessment took 4 hours. Memory tests, problem-solving exercises, pattern recognition, verbal reasoning, mathematical calculations. Dr. Warren was thorough and professional, explaining each test and what it measured. When we finished, she reviewed the results with me immediately. Mr. Kowalski, I can say with complete professional confidence that you show no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or any other cognitive impairment. Your memory is excellent for your age group, your reasoning skills are sharp, and your judgment appears sound. In fact, your cognitive function is above average for someone in their 70s. Relief flooded through me. So if someone was claiming I was incompetent to manage my own affairs? Based on this assessment, such a claim would be completely unsupported. You are fully capable of making your own financial and legal decisions. She paused. Mr. Kowalski, I have to ask, are you being financially exploited by someone who's claiming you're incompetent? I believe so, yes. Dr. Warren's expression hardened. I see this more often than you'd think. Elder financial abuse often involves claims of incompetence to justify the theft. I'll have a detailed report ready by tomorrow, and I'm willing to testify about these findings if necessary. I left Dr. Warren's office with official documentation that Janet's central claim was false. But I knew that wouldn't stop her. It would just force her to change tactics. My phone rang as I was driving home. Frank Mazer. Dale, we need to talk immediately. Can you come to my office? 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Frank, who looked like he'd aged 5 years since yesterday. I got some disturbing news this morning. Janet filed an emergency petition with the court claiming you've been threatening her and Carol. She's asking for a restraining order. The room spun. What? I haven't threatened anyone. According to her filing, you've been acting erratically and making veiled threats about making people pay for imaginary wrongs. She claims you've been following Carol and making her uncomfortable. Janet was escalating faster than I'd expected. She was trying to paint me as the dangerous, unstable husband who was threatening innocent women. Frank, this is insane. I haven't even confronted her about what I know. I believe you, but here's the problem. If she gets that restraining order, it'll support her narrative that you're unstable. It'll also make it much harder for you to access evidence or confront her about the theft. When's the hearing? Tomorrow morning. Which means we need to move fast. Frank pulled out a thick folder. I spent all night preparing our counterfiling. We're going to request an emergency freeze on all accounts connected to Janet, Carol, and Patricia. We're also filing fraud charges and requesting a full accounting of all marital assets. Will it work? Depends on the judge. But Dale, once we file this, there's no going back. This becomes a public legal battle. Your marriage is over, and it's going to get ugly. I thought about Janet upstairs that morning, humming while she made coffee, playing the role of the concerned wife. I thought about 37 years of shared memories that I now knew were built on lies. I thought about the house I'd lost, the savings that had been stolen, the deliberate campaign to destroy my reputation. File it all, Frank. It's time to stop playing defense. That evening, I went home to find Janet cooking my favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans. The same meal she'd made the night Sarah announced her moving plans, back when I still thought I was living in my own house with my loving wife. You look tired, honey, Janet said, kissing my cheek as I sat down. How did your doctor's appointment go? The digital recorder in my pocket was capturing everything. It went very well, actually. Dr. Warren says my cognitive function is excellent. No signs of dementia or any other problems. Janet's smile flickered for just a moment. Well, that's wonderful news. I'm so relieved. But I could see the calculation behind her eyes. If she couldn't have me declared incompetent, she'd need a different strategy. Janet, I need to ask you something directly. Have you been talking to lawyers about our marriage? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Janet stopped eating, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. What kind of question is that, Dale? Why would I be talking to lawyers? It's a simple question. Have you consulted with any attorneys about divorce proceedings? Janet set down her fork and looked at me with an expression of hurt surprise. Dale, you're starting to worry me. First you were paranoid about our finances, now you're accusing me of planning to leave you. This doesn't sound like the rational thinking Dr. Warren supposedly found. She was good. Even caught off guard, Janet was turning my questions into evidence of my alleged instability. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking a direct question and I'd appreciate a direct answer. The answer is no, Dale. I have never consulted with any divorce attorneys because I have no intention of leaving my husband of 37 years. The lie was so smooth, so convincing, that if I didn't have evidence of her deception, I might have believed her myself. What about our house? Have you had any conversations with anyone about selling it or transferring ownership? Now Janet looked genuinely confused. Dale, what's gotten into you? We've lived in this house for decades. Why would I sell it behind your back? She was either an incredible actress, or she genuinely believed her own lies. Either way, she was sticking to her story even when directly confronted. I'm just trying to understand some financial irregularities I've noticed. Janet reached across the table and took my hand. Honey, if you're worried about our finances, let's go through everything together tomorrow. I'll show you all our accounts, all our statements, everything. You'll see that nothing's wrong. The offer was probably sincere. Janet was so confident in her covering of tracks that she believed I wouldn't be able to find evidence of her theft even if she showed me the accounts directly. She was about to learn how wrong she was. That sounds like a good idea, Janet. Let's do that. Wonderful. And Dale? If you're feeling anxious about money or our relationship, maybe we should schedule some counseling. I think it would help both of us. Even now, even caught in multiple lies, Janet was still trying to position herself as the caring wife concerned about her troubled husband. After dinner, I excused myself to my shop again. But this time, I called Frank from my cell phone. Everything's ready for tomorrow, Frank said. The emergency motions have been filed. Janet will be served with papers first thing in the morning, right before her hearing for the restraining order. What should I expect? Chaos. Once she realizes we know everything, she's going to do whatever she can to minimize the damage. She might try to claim everything was innocent, that she was just protecting assets from your alleged incompetence. Or she might try to disappear with whatever money she can grab. And Carol? She's being served too. Along with Patricia in California. I hung up and sat in my shop, surrounded by decades of accumulated tools and projects, knowing this would be my last quiet night in this house. Tomorrow, everything would explode into the open. But I was ready for war. Janet and Carol had spent 2 years planning their attack on my life. Now they were about to discover what happened when you underestimate a 72-year-old man who has nothing left to lose. I barely slept that night, listening to Janet breathe beside me and wondering if she suspected what was coming. At 5:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Process server will be at your house at 7 o'clock. Be ready. I got up and made coffee, going through the motions of a normal morning routine. Janet came downstairs at 6:45, already dressed and looking unusually alert for someone who claimed to sleep soundly. You're up early, she said, pouring herself coffee. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what you said last night, about going through our finances together. Janet smiled that practiced smile. I'm glad you're feeling better about it. I think once you see how well I've been managing everything, you'll feel more at ease. At exactly 7 a.m., the doorbell rang. Janet frowned. Who could that be so early? I opened the door to find a young woman in a business suit holding a thick manila envelope. Janet Kowalski? That's my wife, I said, stepping aside. The woman walked into our kitchen where Janet was standing by the counter, coffee mug still in her hand. Mrs. Kowalski, you're being served with legal documents regarding emergency motions filed in family court. You have a hearing at 10 a.m. this morning. Janet took the envelope with shaking hands. As she opened it and began reading, I watched her face transform from confusion to shock to something close to panic. What is this? She whispered. Emergency motions to freeze assets, charges of fraud and elder financial abuse, and a counter-petition regarding your request for a restraining order, the process server said professionally. You'll want to contact an attorney immediately. After the woman left, Janet stood in our kitchen holding the papers, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Dale, what have you done? I've protected myself from being robbed by my own wife. Janet's mask finally slipped completely. You don't understand. I was protecting us. You've been making poor decisions, forgetting things. I had to secure our assets before you lost everything. Janet, I have a professional cognitive assessment that proves I'm completely competent. I also have bank records showing systematic theft, evidence of forged signatures, and documentation of your conspiracy with Carol and Patricia. The coffee mug slipped from Janet's hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. How did you find out about Patricia? It was the first honest thing she'd said in months, a complete admission that there was something to find out. The question isn't how I found out. The question is how you thought you could steal my house, drain our bank accounts, and destroy my reputation without me eventually discovering it. Janet sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the legal papers scattered around her. Dale, you have to understand. Carol and I, we never meant for it to go this far. So you admit it? You admit to the affair, the theft, the conspiracy? It wasn't supposed to be like this. Carol and I found each other after years of being unhappy in our marriages. We just wanted to be together, but we knew our families would never understand. So you decided to steal everything I owned to finance your new life together? Janet looked up at me with tears in her eyes. We were going to make sure you were taken care of. The plan was to get you into a nice assisted living facility, somewhere you'd be comfortable and safe. The audacity was breathtaking. Janet had convinced herself that stealing my assets and having me institutionalized was somehow an act of kindness. And you thought I wouldn't fight back? Dale, you're 72 years old. Carol and I thought, we thought you'd just accept it. We thought by the time you figured out what happened, if you ever did, it would be too late to do anything about it. At 8:30 my phone rang. It was Frank. Dale, where are you? At home with Janet. She's been served. You need to get out of there immediately. Carol Brennan has disappeared. Her house is empty, her bank accounts have been cleaned out, and there's no sign of her anywhere. I looked at Janet, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. What does that mean? It means Carol saw this coming and she's run. Janet needs to get to that hearing, but I'm worried Carol might try to contact her and convince her to run too. I hung up and looked at my wife of 37 years. Carol's gone, isn't she? Janet's face went white. What do you mean, gone? Frank says her house is empty and her accounts are cleaned out. She ran rather than face the fraud charges. Janet stood up abruptly and ran to the phone. I listened as she dialed Carol's number and got no answer. Then she tried Carol's cell phone, her work number, even Patricia's number in California. Nothing. She left me, Janet whispered, sinking back into the chair. She took the money and left me to face this alone. The irony was perfect. Janet, who had betrayed me so completely, was now experiencing her own betrayal. Carol, faced with the choice between supporting Janet through legal consequences or disappearing with as much money as possible, had chosen to save herself. Janet, you have two choices. You can go to that hearing and try to explain to a judge why you stole your husband's house and life savings. Or you can follow Carol's example and run. Janet looked at me with something approaching hatred. You've destroyed everything. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped pretending I didn't know what you'd done to me. Janet went upstairs to get ready for the hearing, and I called Frank back. She's going to the hearing. Carol has abandoned her completely. Good. That actually works in our favor. If Janet's fighting this alone, without Carol's resources or support, she's much more vulnerable. At 9:30, Janet came downstairs wearing her best dress and carrying a small suitcase. Where do you think you're going with that? I asked. I don't know if I'll be coming home after this hearing, she said quietly. Janet, running will only make things worse. Face the consequences of what you've done. She stopped at the kitchen door and turned back to look at me. Dale, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Everything I did because I thought it was the only way Carol and I could be happy. You destroyed me because you thought it would make you happy? I destroyed us both. I see that now. An hour later, Frank called with news from the courthouse. Janet showed up, but she couldn't even afford an attorney. She tried to represent herself and it was a disaster. The judge took one look at the evidence we presented, the forged documents, the secret bank accounts, the cognitive assessment proving you're competent, and not only denied her request for a restraining order, he issued an emergency order freezing every account connected to her. What happens now? Now the real legal battle begins. Janet's broke, her co-conspirator has fled the state, and she's facing serious criminal charges. But Dale, I need to prepare you for something. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Janet's desperate now, and desperate people do unpredictable things. That afternoon, I got a call from Sarah. Dad, Mom just called me crying. She says you've destroyed the family, that you've made it impossible for her to come home. She's asking if she can stay with me. What did you tell her? I told her she made her choices and now she has to live with them. But Dad, she sounded broken. Completely defeated. I felt a moment of sympathy for the woman who had shared my life for nearly 4 decades. But then I remembered the systematic way she'd stolen from me, the lies she told about my mental state, the years of deception and betrayal. Sarah, your mother had 2 years to come clean about what she was doing. She had 100 chances to tell me the truth and work things out. Instead, she chose to steal everything I worked for and tried to have me declared incompetent. I'm sorry she's broken now, but she broke me first. That evening, I sat alone in what I still thought of as my house, even though legally it belonged to Patricia Chin. The silence was complete, no Janet humming in the kitchen, no television shows, no sounds of another person sharing the space I'd called home for 35 years. But for the first time in months, I felt peaceful. The lies were over. The pretense was finished. Whatever happened next, I was finally fighting back against the people who tried to steal my life. And if you think this story ends with me getting everything back and living happily ever after, you're in for a surprise. Because what happened over the next few days taught me that revenge, even when it's justified, always comes with a price. 3 days after the hearing, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the window, I saw Janet getting out of an unfamiliar sedan, moving like a woman who'd aged 10 years in a week. She looked terrible, her hair unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her face hollow with exhaustion and defeat. But what struck me most was how small she seemed. The confident woman who'd been systematically stealing from me for 2 years had been replaced by someone who looked broken and lost. Janet knocked on what used to be our front door, a gesture that acknowledged, perhaps for the first time, that this was no longer her home. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Dale, I need to get some of my things. Everything in this house legally belongs to Patricia Chin now." "You made sure of that?" Janet's face crumpled. "Please. Just my personal items. Some clothes, my jewelry, photographs." I stepped aside and let her enter the house where we built a life together. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar objects, as if trying to remember what it felt like when this had been her home. "Where have you been staying?" I asked. "A motel near the highway. I can't afford anything else now that the accounts are frozen." I followed her upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and watched her pack a single suitcase with clothes and personal items. Her movements were mechanical, automatic, like someone sleepwalking through a nightmare. "Janet, I need to ask you something. When did you stop loving me?" She paused in her packing, holding a photograph of our wedding day. We looked so young, so hopeful, so certain that love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. "I never stopped loving you, Dale. That's what makes this so horrible. You don't steal everything from someone you love." Janet sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the wedding photo. "I loved you, but I wasn't in love with you anymore. Do you understand the difference?" I did understand, more than I wanted to. "When did you fall in love with Carol?" "About 6 years ago. After her husband left her, and yes, he did leave her, he didn't die. I was helping her through the divorce, spending time with her, and we realized we had feelings for each other." "So you've been living a lie for 6 years." "We both were. Carol was pretending to be the grieving widow, I was pretending to be the happy wife. But Dale, when we were together, it was the first time in years that either of us felt truly alive." Janet set down the photograph and looked at me directly. "I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you terribly. But I also know that staying in a marriage where I was just going through the motions would have been wrong too. You could have asked for a divorce. And split everything 50-50? Dale, you worked so hard for so many years. You deserved more than that. We convinced ourselves that if we could make you think you were losing your mind, we could put you somewhere safe and comfortable while Carol and I started over with enough money to take care of all 3 of us." The rationalization was stunning in its selfishness. Janet and Carol had decided that stealing my assets and institutionalizing me was somehow more ethical than an honest divorce. "Did you ever consider what it would do to me to think I was losing my mind?" For the first time since she'd arrived, Janet showed real emotion. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Every day. Every time I saw you looking confused or worried, every time you started questioning yourself, I felt sick. But by then we were in too deep to stop." "Where's Carol now?" "I don't know. She cleaned out her accounts and disappeared 3 days ago. I think she went to California to stay with Patricia, but they won't return my calls." Janet finished packing and stood to leave. But at the bedroom door, she turned back. "Dale, I know you'll never forgive me. I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that destroying you was never the plan. We just wanted to be together, and we made terrible choices trying to make that happen." "Janet, you didn't just make terrible choices. You committed felonies. You're probably going to prison." She nodded. "I know. My court-appointed attorney says the fraud charges alone could mean 5 to 7 years. At my age, that might as well be a life sentence. As Janet walked through our house for what would probably be the last time, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. This woman who had systematically destroyed my life was now facing the complete destruction of her own. She'd lost her marriage, her home, her savings, her reputation, and her future. Even her co-conspirator had abandoned her. The revenge I'd wanted was complete. Janet was going to prison, Carol was a fugitive, and their dream of a life together had turned into a nightmare of legal consequences and mutual betrayal. But watching Janet walk to her borrowed car, her shoulders shaking with sobs, I realized that revenge doesn't feel the way you think it will. I'd expected satisfaction, closure, maybe even joy. Instead, I felt empty. 2 hours later, Frank called with an update. The FBI found Carol. She was arrested at Patricia's house in California trying to withdraw money from Patricia's account. Apparently, Carol had been pressuring Patricia to give her cash to disappear, and Patricia finally called the police. What about Patricia? She's cooperating fully. Claims she never understood she was part of a fraud scheme, says Carol told her the money was from a family inheritance. She's returning the house to you and testifying against both Carol and Janet. So I get my house back? Eventually. It'll take a few months to work through the legal process, but yes. You'll also recover most of your stolen savings, minus legal fees and court costs. I should have been elated. I was getting my house back, recovering my money, and seeing justice served. But all I felt was tired. That evening, Sarah called. Dad, I just talked to Mom. She told me what happened today, about you letting her get her things. She needed her personal items. Dad, you could have made that difficult for her. You could have been cruel. She knows that, and she's grateful. I'm not a cruel person, Sarah. Even after everything she did to me. That's what makes this so sad. Mom told me she finally understands what she threw away. She said she realized today that she destroyed the marriage of the only man who ever truly loved her. We were both quiet for a moment. Dad, can I ask you something? Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive her? I'd been asking myself the same question. I don't know, sweetheart. Forgiveness isn't the same as trust, and I don't think I could ever trust your mother again. But hate takes too much energy, and I'm too old to carry that kind of anger. What will you do now? I guess I'll figure out how to live alone after 37 years of marriage. Learn to cook for one, get used to the quiet, maybe take up some new hobbies. Dad, you know you don't have to be alone, right? Michael and I both want to spend more time with you. And there are other people out there, other possibilities for companionship. The idea of dating at 72 seemed surreal, but Sarah was right. I didn't have to spend my remaining years isolated and bitter. We'll see, honey. Right now I just want to get through the legal proceedings and get my house back. After I hung up, I walked through the rooms of the house that would soon be mine again. Every space held memories of the life Janet and I had built together, good memories mixed with the bitter knowledge of how it had all ended. But here's what I'd learned through this whole nightmare. You can't change what people do to you, but you can choose how you respond. Janet and Carol had chosen deception and theft. I'd chosen to fight back and reclaim what was mine. The cost of that choice was the end of my marriage and the destruction of a family. But the alternative, living the rest of my life as the victim of their fraud, would have been worse. Sometimes the price of truth is everything you thought you wanted. But paying that price is still better than living a lie. 6 months later, I was sitting on the front porch of my house, legally mine again, watching the sunrise and drinking coffee from my favorite mug. The legal battles were over. Janet was serving a 4-year sentence for elder fraud and identity theft. Carol had been extradited from California and was serving 6 years, her sentence enhanced because she'd fled and attempted to destroy evidence. But this story isn't really about their punishment. It's about what I learned about myself when everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be a lie. The house felt different now. Not just because Janet was gone, but because every room had been tainted by the knowledge of her deception. I found myself avoiding the kitchen where she'd made dinner while secretly planning my financial destruction. I'd moved out of our bedroom entirely, converting the guest room into my new sleeping space. Some people might call that letting her win, allowing her betrayal to drive me out of spaces that were rightfully mine. But I prefer to think of it as creating new memories to replace the poisoned ones. Sarah had been right about me not having to be alone. My children visited more often now, and I'd reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the final years of my marriage. Funny how isolation had crept up on me without my realizing it. Janet had gradually discouraged social activities, claiming she preferred quiet evenings at home. Now I understood she'd been worried that friends might notice inconsistencies in our finances or her behavior. 3 weeks after getting my house back, I'd done something that surprised even me. I'd started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping other elderly people who'd been victims of financial fraud. Frank Mazer had suggested it, thinking my experience might be valuable to others facing similar situations. What I discovered was sobering. Elder financial abuse was epidemic, and family members were the perpetrators in over 60% of cases. I met dozens of people who'd been robbed by their own children, siblings, or spouses. Some had lost everything and would never recover. Others, like me, had fought back and won their assets back but lost their families in the process. But here's what struck me most: every single one of these victims had missed warning signs, just like I had. We'd all chosen to trust the people closest to us rather than believe evidence of their betrayal. Love, it turns out, can make you dangerously blind. The volunteer work gave me purpose and helped me process my own experience. There's something healing about helping others navigate trauma you've survived yourself. And there's something powerful about turning your worst experience into a tool for protecting other people. For months after Janet went to prison, I got a letter from her. The return address was the Federal Correctional Institution in Ohio where she was serving her sentence. I stared at that letter for 3 days before opening it. "Dale," it began, "I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect you to respond. But I needed to try to explain something I couldn't articulate when I was packing my things that last day. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you, to us, to our family. Prison gives you nothing but time to think. And I've realized that the worst part isn't the fraud or the theft, or even the affair with Carol. The worst part is that I convinced myself I was protecting you while I was destroying you. I told myself that having you declared incompetent and placed in care would be kinder than a messy divorce. I told myself that you'd be happier not knowing about my relationship with Carol. I told myself that taking control of our assets was responsible financial planning. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid to ask for a divorce because I knew you'd fight for half of everything, and I wanted more than half. I was afraid to admit my affair because I knew it would hurt you, and I didn't want to see that pain in your eyes. I was afraid to face the consequences of my choices, so I tried to make you disappear instead. Carol has written me exactly once since our arrests. She blamed me for getting caught, said I should have been more careful about covering our tracks. She never once acknowledged what we'd done to you or expressed any remorse. I think I finally understand what kind of person I was in love with, and what kind of person I became to be with her. You deserve to know that I think about you every day. Not with longing for what we had, but with shame for what I destroyed. We had a real marriage, Dale. For 30 years, we had something genuine and valuable, and I threw it away for an obsession that wasn't even real. I don't know what I'll do when I get out. I have no money, no home, no family who'll speak to me. Sarah visits occasionally, but I can see the disappointment in her eyes. Michael won't even take my calls. I've lost everything that ever mattered, and I did it to myself. But I want you to know that losing you was the worst consequence of all. Not the money, not the house, not even my freedom. Knowing that I turned the love of my life into someone who can't stand the sight of me, that's my real punishment. I hope you're finding happiness, Dale. I hope you're building a new life that brings you peace. You deserve so much better than what I gave you. Janet. I read that letter 5 times before deciding what to do with it. Part of me wanted to tear it up and throw it away. Why should I care about Janet's remorse when she'd shown none while systematically robbing me? But another part of me recognized something I needed: closure. I wrote back, Just one page. Janet, I received your letter and I appreciate your honesty about what you did and why you did it. You're right that you were a coward, and you're right that you destroyed something valuable for something that wasn't real. But you're also right that I deserve better, and I'm finally getting it. I'm building a life based on truth instead of lies, surrounded by people who respect me instead of people who see me as an obstacle to their happiness. I forgive you, Janet. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger toward you was poisoning my ability to trust anyone else. Forgiveness doesn't mean I excuse what you did or that I want you in my life. It means I'm choosing to focus on my future instead of your betrayal. When you get out of prison, I hope you find a way to build something honest. You're going to be in your 70s, starting over with nothing. Maybe that will teach you the value of what you threw away. Don't write to me again. This chapter of both our lives is closed. Dale. 6 weeks later, I met Eleanor. She was volunteering at the same legal aid clinic, helping elderly clients navigate Medicare fraud cases. Eleanor was 74, widowed for 3 years, sharp as a razor, and completely unimpressed by my story of survival and recovery. You got taken by your wife for 2 years and you think that makes you an expert on fraud? She said during our first conversation. Honey, I've been fighting scammers and thieves for 20 years. You're still an amateur hour. I should have been offended. Instead, I was intrigued. Eleanor had lost her husband to lung cancer and discovered afterward that he'd been hiding gambling debts that consumed most of their retirement savings. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, she'd educated herself about financial fraud, recovered what she could through legal action, and spent her remaining years helping other people avoid similar traps. The difference between you and me, Eleanor said over coffee after our 3rd week working together, is that you're surprised people you trusted could betray you. I always assume everyone's trying to steal from me until they prove otherwise. That sounds like a lonely way to live. Lonely but solvent. Which is more than you could say 6 months ago. Eleanor was right, but she was also wrong. Yes, my trust had made me vulnerable to Janet's deception. But it had also given me 30 good years of marriage before the betrayal began. The trick, I was learning, was finding the balance between reasonable caution and paralyzing suspicion. Working with Eleanor, I began to understand something important about starting over at 72. You don't get to pretend you're young again or that you have unlimited time to recover from mistakes. But you do get the advantage of perspective, the ability to recognize what's truly important and what's just noise. After 3 months of working together, Eleanor and I started having dinner after our volunteer sessions. After 6 months, she started coming to my house on Sundays to help me tackle home improvement projects I'd been avoiding since Janet left. You know I'm not looking for another marriage, Eleanor told me one evening as we painted the kitchen cabinets. I've been married, buried a husband, and cleaned up his messes. I'm not interested in taking on someone else's problems again. Good, I replied. Because I'm not looking to be taken care of. I've learned to cook my own meals, do my own laundry, and manage my own finances. I don't need a wife. So what do we call this? Eleanor asked, gesturing between us. Companionship. Friendship. Partnership in making sure either of us gets scammed again. Eleanor laughed. That might be the least romantic relationship definition I've ever heard. But it's honest. I like honest. As I finish telling you this story, I'm sitting on that same front porch where I started, but I'm not alone anymore. Eleanor is beside me, reading through case files for tomorrow's clients while I watch the sunset and reflect on how much my life has changed. I got my house back, recovered most of my money, and saw justice served on the people who betrayed me. But more importantly, I learned that survival isn't just about fighting back against the people who hurt you. It's about choosing to remain open to the people who won't. Janet took 2 years of my life and almost took everything else. But she didn't break me, and she didn't make me bitter. If anything, her betrayal taught me to value honesty, recognize manipulation, and appreciate the people who choose to love me without trying to destroy me in the process. If you're facing betrayal by someone you trusted, if someone close to you is trying to convince you that you're losing your mind or that they know what's best for you, remember this: You're stronger than they think you are, smarter than they're hoping you are, and more valuable than they're treating you like you are. Fight back. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And don't let anyone convince you that theft is protection or that lies are love. But most importantly, don't let their betrayal close you off to everyone else. The world is full of people like Eleanor, honest, straightforward people who will value what you have to offer without trying to take everything you've worked for. At 72, I'm building the most honest relationship of my life with a woman who sees me exactly as I am and likes me anyway. We're both too old for games, too experienced for illusions, and too smart to mistake manipulation for love. Janet spent 2 years planning my destruction and ended up destroying herself instead. Eleanor and I spend our time protecting other people from similar destruction while building something genuine together. I know which approach leads to happiness. If this story resonated with you, if you've faced betrayal or financial abuse, or if you just believe that age doesn't have to mean becoming a victim, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because everyone deserves to know that it's never too late to fight back, and it's never too late to start over with people who will treat you with the respect you deserve. Justice served, life reclaimed, and love found again. At 72, I'm living proof that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's building something better than what they tried to take from you.